All right, then. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I'm talking for the third time with Mr. Borge Fagerli, who recently has done something really cool that has sparked a lot of debates and a lot of discussions on Facebook about a certain Zero Carb experiment, and has released an ebook and a recipe book on that topic as well. And we touched on this at the end of the episode. And hopefully this time technical difficulties won't get in the way. So with that, Borge, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So first, maybe let's just jump into the basics. What did you do exactly, or not exactly, but roughly what did you do, and what inspired you to start this little experiment of yours?
Well, in short, what I did was eat an all-meat diet at first, just as a 30-day experiment. But since I felt so good on it, and I started experiencing a lot of positive adaptations, I just decided I would keep going for another 30 days, and then that turned into almost 90 days. I had to cut it short around the 10-week mark or so. Simply because I got some blood tests, and I wanted to see, since I didn't have any previous blood tests for a long time, I wanted to see how it would affect various markers going back to carbs in the diet again, and also to see if I could go back to a carb-based diet, and how that would work after having been eating almost only meat for around 75 days. And so what inspired me to do this, I should say that I have previously and quite unsuccessfully tried to do a ketogenic diet, and that didn't work at all for me, and which was kind of confusing, because I had all the requirements for making a ketogenic diet work for me. I have a lower carb tolerance. I seem to over-secrete insulin at a given carb intake, and so where my where my insulin sensitivity is quite good, since I'm quite lean and I train a lot. So my cells should be like at a high capacity for accepting incoming glucose, but my body seems intent on overproducing insulin at a certain amount of carbs. So I suffer from reactive hypoglycemia all the time, basically. I also have genetic markers that. Obviously, the gene analysis technology is still in its infancy, but according to various genes, I should be able to handle a high fat intake quite well, and I have a pretty poor blood sugar regulation according to the gene test, which incidentally coincide with my practical experience. And the last point is that my ancestry is I'm a Viking ancestry, and my ancestors are originating from Scandinavia, from several generations back. And if you look at their traditional diet, it was like a moderate carb diet most of the year, and we would have access to like low calorie density or energy density foods. Like berries and potatoes and that kind of stuff. And during winter time, it was usually, since at that time, a few hundred years ago, there wasn't any way to store plant foods throughout the winter, so we would have to subsist on some fermented foods, obviously, but mostly game meat and fish that we would hunt and fish. So there are several reasons why I should be functioning quite well on a low carb diet with a higher protein and fat intake, but for some reason I didn't have any of the satiating benefits, so I was hungry all the time. I had mental fog. My gym performance suffered. I just couldn't seem to quite adapt to a regular ketogenic diet. And for those listeners who don't know exactly what a ketogenic diet is, to generate sufficient ketones to achieve ketogenic state, you need to limit your protein intake to around 1.5 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, and you need to eat at least 70% of calories from fats. So, or obviously you could go in a calorie deficit and achieve ketosis, but you still need to limit protein in order for protein not to convert into glucose through gluconeogenesis. So there are various rules that need to be followed if you are to do a strict ketogenic diet, and that just didn't work for me.
Right.
So yeah, so what inspired me to try the zero carb diet was I listened to a podcast with Dr. Sean Baker, and he's he was recently on the Joe Rogan podcast, so he's getting quite a name for himself now. He's a 50-year-old surgeon, master's world record holder in recently the Concept 2 indoor rower, where he's his performances are way beyond the guys in their 20s and 30s, so it's quite impressive feats. And he's been following an all-meat diet for almost a year. Before that, he was on a ketogenic diet, and he said the same thing. He didn't feel quite well on the ketogenic diet. And when he switched to an all-meat diet, his performance improved, and he just felt so much better. And he has seen the same thing in many of his patients, and even in his father. So I thought, well, maybe that's for me, because, I love meat, and this sounds more like intuitively logical compared to a ketogenic diet, where I felt like I had to force feed on fats and restrict my protein intake just to avoid inhibiting ketosis. And I obviously did my due diligence first, did some research, looked into like zero carb diets and its prevalence, and there's actually like Facebook groups with 15 and 20,000 members where people have been living on an all-meat diet for several years, even decades. I came upon a book by Vilhjálmur Stefansson, an Icelandic explorer, Arctic explorer, who lived with the Inuits and lived obviously eating their food, which is almost all meat. And has done quite an extensive research into like the native Indians and their diets, and he also performed a 1-year experiment where him and his friend was closely monitored by medical experts at Bellevue Hospital, and all of their health markers improved. They lost weight, they had no signs of nutritional deficiencies, and so all in all, I just figured, hey, why the hell not? Let me see what happens, and so I did.
Right. So just two more basic questions here. One is so basically, what inspired you to try it is that before you realized that your energy levels were not quite good, so you had some reactive hypoglycemia after your meal. So I'm assuming by that you mean that you felt lethargic, you have these crash-like episodes after eating a high-carb meal. So I guess a lot of people would wonder, why not just try maybe just a lower carb diet, maybe like, I don't know, something like eating only 100 to 150 grams of carbs, which for a larger guy like yourself could be still a low-carb diet?
Well, if you can name it, I've tried it. So I've tried basically all variations of macronutrient ratios. I would actually end up around 150 to 200 grams of carbs quite intuitively. I just lowered my carbs stepwise and focused it around my workouts and also for the final meal. But since my workouts are usually around noon, I would have like a high carb meal after my workout, and my mental performance would suffer for several hours afterwards. And that's like one of the high points of my day when it comes to doing client work and Skype calls and that kind of stuff. So, and also I got some major cravings. Like I would constantly think about food. It was difficult to stay lean. I would have to keep bouncing between a diet and a surplus, and spend more time dieting than actually being in a surplus, because I would gain so quickly, even at like lower calories than most calculations would assume. My digestive issues was probably one of the main reasons where I would feel constantly bloated. I have been trying like a low FODMAP diet. I even tried a 30-day vegan challenge where I ate nothing but plant foods and like tofu and that kind of stuff. So I basically just tried everything to see how that would affect me, and I still hadn't found anything that made me feel stable and allowed me to eat to hunger, basically eat to fullness, like an ad libitum diet, and still stay lean. I would constantly have to control my calories. So I think all of these things just led me to want to try the zero carb diet, because I noticed that one of the main benefits that people reported from the zero carb approach was that their digestive issues just cleared completely up, like everything from constipation to diarrhea to bloating to IBS symptoms to even ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, and people just noticed spontaneous healing almost instantly from implementing a zero carb approach, where they removed all fiber and all plant matter and to sort of give their digestive system a rest. And to me, that sounded intuitively correct, since, again, my ancestors would usually spend like at least 2 or 3 months out of the year without eating or consuming any type of plant matter. So I'm not saying that you should give your colon or digestive system a rest from food or from plant foods or whatever food, but I do believe there's an actual circannual rhythm in our food consumption, where we don't eat the same thing all year unless you live around the equator, where there are basically no seasons. Winter and summertime is just a small variation in temperature, and so you usually have access to the same foods year round. But at higher latitudes, like up north, there's a huge swing in what foods we are able to eat throughout the various seasons. So just many things made it seem very logical. It sort of just struck a nerve with me, and I thought this sounds logical. This sounds like something I could do very well on.
Right. And the last question of these basic ones is, so you ate only meat, so no eggs, even no dairy, nothing like that?
For the first 30 days, I ate all meat, but I did eat some eggs as well. So it wasn't strictly an all meat diet for me, but it was an all animal food diet. Since some people reported feeling much better when they excluded dairy as well, and since it scores really high on the palatability scale, so since it can be hard to auto-regulate your appetite when you eat a lot of cheese, for instance, I chose to exclude that as well. But after the 30 days, I started reintroducing, both some fish and some dairy, and I ate more eggs. I also ate different types of meat during my 30-day experiment. So lamb's meat, some chicken, but mostly beef. just to see how it would affect me, and I felt mostly fine on everything, maybe except for poultry, like chicken. If I eat a lot of that, it's almost as if I don't feel as focused or strong. It's hard to explain because it's mostly subjective. But when I reintroduced dairy, that didn't really affect me either way. So for me, I can digest and function well on dairy, and I later also introduced protein powders, and I felt fine on that as well. So for me, dairy was completely fine, but your mileage may vary. There are many people that notice that anything from eczema and acne to mucus production can clear up when they eliminate dairy for some time.
Yeah. Actually, one comment, just because I'm concerned that I will forget it. Like, one thing that a lot of people don't talk about when discussing who the ketogenic diet is applicable for, I think actually a big component of that is how robust is your gut. Because if your gut cannot tolerate large amounts of low calorie, high fiber green veggies such as broccoli, which are actually often also high FODMAP, then the ketogenic diet will probably be pretty problematic for you, or you will be just really hungry because you will be just eating an extremely low volume of food. Like, one big reason why I could just not make a ketogenic diet work for me is because my gut just doesn't tolerate those veggies. So that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, exactly, and that's basically one of the key points, and probably one of the reasons why the zero carb approach has worked so well for both myself and several people worldwide, and also a lot of my clients, because there's like, evolutionary speaking, we would not have, unless you lived in like a tropical climate, you would not have access to plant foods all the time. So our digestive system, if you look at it, if you really analyze it, it seems to be more adapted towards digesting meats. But we are omnivores, which means that we have sort of the capacity to also digest plant matter. But I just, I basically, in this book as well, I posted some links to some vegan sites where there were like hundreds, even 1,000 comments below this vegan blog post about the bloating and digestive issues. And there were people that had been vegans for several years and even all their life, and they had just sort of gotten used to all the farting and burping and bloating and all that stuff. And because to them it was more important to avoid eating animal foods than actually having proper digestive health. Having said that, there are obviously a few vegans that I'm saying a few because I just haven't personally met too many of them, but I have coached a couple of vegan clients who actually thrived on plant food. So I'm not going to be the dogmatic type and say that, well, everyone should eat all meat and should avoid plant foods, because that's obviously bullshit. We don't have any scientific evidence or even anecdote to support that. But for a lot of people, I think doing a period without plant foods at all is both evolutionary, an evolutionary smart thing to do, since basically for most of human history we probably had to go through periods without access to plant foods, and so I think our digestive system is adapted to having some sort of rest from both eating in general, like intermittent fasting performance will fully support, but also a complete rest from eating plant foods. And so far the anecdotal feedback on this is overwhelming in terms of I've had like clients with severe Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. What's the term for it? Ulcerative colitis. Sorry. IBS, and obviously IBS just being an umbrella term for whatever doctors can't actually diagnose in terms of digestive issues. and just 30 days of no plants at all, and all protein and fats, and all meat, which is what I recommend if you have severe issues, and everything is gone. And I mean, this is from having suffered for years with all sorts of digestive issues, and everything is basically just back to normal within such a short period of time. I would, I'm sort of blown away by the success rates I've seen in people suffering from some severe issues, just going through that zero carb adaptation phase, and at least 30 days in some individuals, they probably need like 60 or even 90 days to get the full benefits of it. But I think it's something to at least be open your mind to, that perhaps there's something to it. Perhaps some people actually just acquire an imbalance in their gut bacteria from consuming plant foods in excess all the time, and just having a break from that. I'm not saying that it should be permanently, but obviously there are thousands of people in all over the world that have adopted an all meat diet and eat nothing but meat for years and have excellent health, but like a middle of the road approach, I would at least consider having a plant-free period sometime during the year, and to see how that works for you if you are suffering from all of these issues. You will go through periods where you feel lethargic, and you have mental fog, and you feel like you can't perform really well. Obviously, this is very similar to how people feel when they first start a ketogenic diet. And I did measure my ketone levels, and I did get up into 1 micromole per liter, which is ketosis by definition, but this was very variable, and I had many days that I didn't approach ketosis at all, simply from eating all of that meat. But yeah, I think that 30 days is the minimal time required to go through the first couple of weeks of adaptation and really get a sense of how this will feel for you, and also like rebalancing the gut microbiome. I think that's an important part of it. There has been some pretty dramatic side effects in terms of just things that seem to indicate that there's a huge die-off of certain bacteria and even parasites. I had clients report some really strange bowel movements. I'm not going to go into details on that, but something just seems to, I don't like the term detox, but there does seem to be some sort of detoxification process going on, where probably bacteria that has been feeding on fiber and glucose for such a long time need to die off and be removed from the body. So some type of rebalancing going on there. But for myself, since I decided, or since I felt so good after 30 days, I decided to stick it out for another 30 days. And so I think in total I ended up almost at 3 months. I was like at 2 months and 2 weeks or something before. This was basically because I did some blood tests, and I wanted to reintroduce carbs and see how that would affect those blood tests, if any health markers or indicators would change, and for the worse or for the better, and stuff like that. But I didn't really feel good when I reintroduced carbs again. I started to get back all of those carb-based diet symptoms I had before, with bloating. I started gaining some weight. I got some digestive issues again, and the huge variation in energy levels, where sometimes you just crash after a meal. And I also tend to have some reactive hypoglycemia once in a while, where my blood sugar goes really low, and For me, it was so low that, I was borderline at the level where most people would go into a coma. But for some reason, I felt pretty good. And I've seen that some people, after adaptation to a zero-carb diet, can actually suffer, or not suffer, but they can tolerate really low blood sugar levels without any side effect at all. So, yeah, just a lot of interesting things that maybe want to go back to a zero-carb diet again. So I'm using that as a base diet now. But I'm not sort of dogmatic or extreme. And, if I feel like having a piece of chocolate, I will eat some chocolate. If I want to have an apple or a banana or some berries or potato, whatever, I will eat that. So for me personally, it's more of like a flexible zero-carb diet. But I think for most people, they should at least try the 30-day period completely on an all-meat diet, and then sort of reintroduce foods one at a time, or food group one at a time. And this is something I devoted a whole chapter to in my ebook, just to sort of cover all my bases.
Yeah, so maybe let's touch for a second on the elephant in the room, because as we know, probably most of the people listening to this are concerned about their body composition. They want to build muscle, they want to lose fat, and they also want to eat in a way that allows them to not be hungry and still control their calories. So maybe let's touch on that for a second. So what did you experience body composition wise? And what did you experience in terms of gym performance, hunger levels, all that kind of stuff? How did that change when you were fully adapted to this diet?
Well, for me, it was pretty dramatic, because I had been dieting for many, many weeks and actually stagnated around 100 kilos, around 12% body fat. Of course, this is only estimated from using calipers. So that might actually be on the low side. But when I started on the zero carb diet, the first couple of days, you obviously lose weight because there are water shifts in the body, and you lose some glycogen and sort of flatten out a little. But even though I tried to keep my calories up, I found this diet to be so satiating that I actually I wasn't hungry at all. It was sort of a different type of hunger, where I would just start feeling weak, but I didn't have like any cravings or feel like I needed to eat. It was just that my body was trying to tell me that I should eat. So it was like a really strange experience, this. And so I probably dropped like 2 kilos just the first week. Then that sort of leveled off a little, but I still lost like 0.5 to 1 kilo per week. So over the 6-week period, I dropped 5 kilos. I dropped almost 6 centimeters from my waist. And like most measurements, dropped from like my ab measurements on the calipers was stuck around 8 millimeters, and that dropped to like 4 and 5 millimeters. And like the lower back area, which is usually the last thing to go, also started dropping, almost like fat melted off me. That's the best term I can use for describing it. It was like a daily change, and people that just saw me at the gym like a couple of times per week would sort of start commenting on it. Hey, what are you up to? What are you doing? Are you dieting or something? Even though I had been dieting for at least 2 months, now they started noticing. So something was going on, and even my face started thinning out. I tend to have a lot of water retention in my face, but on this diet, everything just sort of, my cheeks were almost sucked in, and it was just a radical change in everything. As far as energy levels, more stable energy levels. I started waking earlier in the morning. I felt more awake throughout the day. I was still sleepy in the evenings when I wanted to go to bed. So like around 9 or 10 p.m. I would get really sleepy. it was like a much deeper sleep, at least for me. I've had clients that did sort of wake up a couple of times during the night and almost as if they had this like stress reaction or something. But once I increased their calories, then everything sort of fell into place. Gym performance was pretty good the first couple of days. Then it really tanked. I didn't, my strength dropped. I got this like almost walking through mud feeling in my legs. Like it was almost like I needed to spend effort just lifting my legs, walking up a set of stairs. And so I thought, oh my God, what's going on? Maybe this is not good for me. But I decided to battle it out because I had been warned that this would be a side effect going through the adaptation period. And around the end of week 2 and into week 3, I just started feeling so much better. And my gym performance was back up where it was before I started, even before I started the diet, the carb-based diet, it was back up to that level. And my joints started hurting less, joints and tendons. I'm an older guy, and then I've been lifting since, forever, for 30 years. So I've suffered my strain of injuries, and so that sort of just subsided. It was more like instead of having that stiff feeling every morning when I woke up, I did have one stiff feeling, but let's not go into that. Everything just seemed to work better, and so obviously from all the water loss, there was some inflammation, and this was also confirmed on blood test where my CRP level was actually 0. CRP is like C-reactive protein, a marker for inflammation in the body, and it had usually been around 1 to 2, even up to 3 sometimes, and now it just dropped to 0. So there was definitely something going on there. And sort of the flat feeling I talked about, where my muscles seemed to be sort of flat because they lost the glycogen. That the fullness came back into week 3 and 4, where I even felt that there was like a certain pop to them. I just got this amazing pump when I was in the gym because I don't know, things just seemed to work a lot better. And obviously eating a lot of meat, which is both full of creatine, and you get some gluconeogenesis going from eating all of that protein. And I didn't feel like my glycogen stores were depleted at all. And even the pictures, the before and afters that I used in my blog post and the book, I think it's really apparent that my muscle fullness improved. And I just had an overall, both a visual, obvious visual change in body composition, but also measurable, since my body weight dropped. I was all the way down to 94 kilos at the lowest point, but then stabilized around 95, 96. So like a net loss of around 4 to 5 kilos. And I actually got like a BIA measurement that showed me at 8% body fat. I'm pretty sure that underestimated it, so I'm probably closer to maybe 8 or 9%, somewhere around there. But just looking at the numbers, it seemed as if I gained at least half a kilo of lean mass and dropped 5 kilos of a combination of fat mass and water retention. So yeah, it was all good.
Yeah, it's actually it's very interesting to listen to this. Like, it brings to mind a couple of things. Like one thing is when I first read your ebook, I was right away pretty intrigued actually to try this. I'm kind of on the fence about it to some degree, because I think one of those individuals who tolerates carbs pretty well. Like when I eat a high carb meal, I almost never get sleepy. I almost get this almost euphoric, energetic feeling. But at the same time, when it comes to the gut stuff, generally my rule of thumb is to eat the most amount of fiber I can without causing myself gastrointestinal distress. But right now that fiber amount is pretty low. Like this is pretty much the first time in a long while when I'm eating some high fruit and veggie type of meal, and I'm just bloated after that. My weight fluctuates a lot because of these things. So maybe I'm at one of those points in my journey, like you mentioned, when I would benefit from eliminating plant foods for a while, it seems like.
Yeah, and another point there is that both for myself and my clients, because obviously a lot of people will want to do this experiment just to try it out, and then later on, well, this is not something that I find like socially acceptable, and I miss eating this or that food, and I don't think I can live like this. And that's fine. That's up to the client. I'm not going to try to convince them then that this is, no, you're supposed to eat this way the rest of your life, and what are you doing? And, But the feedback I got was that their digestive function was like 95% improved when they started reintroducing foods again. And I noticed this myself. I would have certain foods that would bloat me up like crazy before. But after the Zero Carb experiment, when I reintroduced those foods again, I would feel pretty good, at least for a while. But over several days, if I kept eating that, I would start to get some of those symptoms back. But in general, it just felt like my tolerance to fiber and sort of, high FODMAP foods and whatever just improved tremendously after my Zero Carb experiment.
Yeah. One thing that was interesting that you wrote about in your book is that having a lack of bowel movements for a few days is not necessarily a red flag. I remember actually trying a Zero Carb type of deal a few years ago when I was basically eating nothing but eggs, beef, and things like that. And I was absent from the toilet basically for like 5 or 6 days, and it just scared the shit out of me, no pun intended.
No pun intended. No.
and actually that spiraled me into a very long time of gut issues. But the caveat there is that what I did, because I was scared, is that I introduced a lot of broccoli and things like that, which was probably the worst thing I could have done at the time, because those are pretty offensive foods in that regard. So when someone is actually not going to the toilet for a while after doing this kind of thing, is that something to be expected and something that should be expected to go away after some time?
Yeah, I think actually a lot of people experience either that, like what feels like constipation, or they get really loose stools, like diarrhea for a while. And I think it's all, it tends to be part of the process. It's something to be expected. As for the feeling of constipation or the lack of bowel movements, that's because on a carb and plant-based diet, the volume of food is huge. I mean, I think if you weigh yourself before and after a toilet visit, you will see that you have dropped like, half a kilo or something. That can be like a normal bowel movement for most people. And so a normal bowel movement on this diet might be 1/5 of that, like 100 grams. And so in the beginning, the colon needs to resensitize to actually produce a bowel movement from the smaller volume of mass that's in there. And that was, not that I'm going to go into details, but the first few days I didn't go to the bathroom at all. And then I started becoming irregular. So it was like, a 10-second bowel movement and then, wipe and you're ready to go, basically. But when I went back to my carb-based diet, since I wanted to do that for like getting blood tests and stuff, I actually had to go to the bathroom like 3 times in one day. And I wasn't eating a lot of carbs or fiber foods. I was careful when I reintroduced it. But my colon had sort of resensitized to such a low mass that now I got the urge anytime, just like a small mass entered my colon, and I had to go to the bathroom. So that was sort of a nuisance when I reintroduced the carb foods, and I think many people have digestive issues simply because it's such a large mass that needs to move through the system at all times, because they're eating such high amounts of fiber, and going through that adaptation phase and the zero carb phase to sort of resensitize the colon, I think can only be a good thing.
Yeah, and speaking of volume of food, what did you experience kind of an adjustment period in terms of your hunger and appetite adjusting? Because that's one kind of fear that I have before trying something like this, that we in the fitness bodybuilding world, many of us kind of get used to eating a high volume of food to manage appetite and hunger because we are leaner than the average person. So we kind of have to manage our appetite a little bit more carefully. So was there kind of an adjustment period when first your appetite had to adjust to a lower general volume of food that you were eating?
For me, no, not at all. I actually had to intentionally force myself to eat more just to keep my calories up. Like I mentioned, my hunger would be sort of different, like almost like this dull feeling of lack of energy that and also because I was used to eating 3 meals per day, so I would generally start to feel sort of this weird type of hunger around those meal times, but sort of the physical hunger, the craving type hunger that I tend to get with carbs, where like my blood sugar drops and I start to get cranky and angry and hangry and all that stuff, that was non-existent. And I've yet to hear from any client that they felt more hungry eating like this. So the lack of volume in stretching the stomach was actually a very welcome side effect, since most people were so used to having their stomach stick out after every meal, but on this meal you just have such a low mass in the belly that it's still flat, and obviously that's an additional reason why waist measurement drops so much, not just all because of the fat loss around the waist, but also because there's so much less volume in your colon at all times. But yeah, I actually had to count calories for a while just to make sure that I got sufficient foods in, and I also noticed that to avoid dropping too fast in weight, at the risk of losing muscle mass, I had to eat probably 800 calories more than I was stuck on my carb-based diet. So I'm not claiming any metabolic magic or anything, but it did seem to change the P ratio, or sort of the nutrient partitioning for myself. So I could get away with eating more and still lose body fat.
And what do you attribute that to? Is it because you just felt so much better that you moved a lot more, or what would be your hypothesis there?
I think my hypothesis is simply because I don't believe in the whole. You can look at the body like a black box, the black box model, where calories in, calories out, and I fully support that. But if you look inside that black box, I think there are various things going on internally in terms of nutrient partitioning, meaning where do the body, or what does the body do with the incoming calories and the stored calories? Does it direct it to muscle building, recovery, energy production, meaning that it can produce movement? I actually increased my body temperature by half a degree. Like it went from 36.5, and I was up into which is supposed to be normal, 37.0. I tend to run cold. My body temperature tends to run cold, but on this diet, it finally came up to where it was supposed to be. So there are definitely some individual results going on there, but at least for the clients that I tried this diet on, and obviously for myself, it seemed to do some sort of I don't know, loss of inflammation, probably increased metabolism in terms of both BMR, or at least maintained BMR, in spite of the weight loss. And NEAT was improved. I just generally had more energy, so I didn't track my activity level precisely with a monitor, but yes, objectively, I think I definitely moved around a little more. But it just generally felt like fat was being used more for energy, and incoming nutrients was being used for recovery and even muscle growth and energy production. So just, all of those things added together seem to create the benefits. And so I'm not claiming any sort of magic here at all. It can all be explained, but like I always say, I tend to consider nutrition as something individual, not general. So I have provided like an overview of what criteria I feel tend to determine what type of diet you will feel best on, and if you fit within those criteria, for instance, having a low carb tolerance, then this sort of diet will definitely be advantageous for you in many regards.
Right. So one thing that was a common question when I posted in somewhere that I will be chatting with you. Some of the more common questions were on the line of how did your blood work look? So you mentioned that your inflammation was lower, and at some point you measured your ketones. Was there anything else that you looked out for?
Yeah, I just got like a general blood panel looking at everything, and like vitamin, mineral status, and everything was perfect. My HDL cholesterol increased. My triglycerides were normal. My magnesium was actually a little high, but that was probably because I had been using the ZMA formula for a while, and so I dropped using that. My LDL cholesterol was actually elevated. That was, actually too high. It was so high that my doctor warned me and told me I should be on statins to lower it. So obviously I started researching this because one of my clients experienced the same result. And he had basically, it was very similar to me in terms of body composition. He was like a 100-kilo guy, very lean, and got even leaner and lost a lot of weight. And I started researching this, and I came over the writings of Dave Feldman of Cholesterol Code, where he had actually created a term for this, and he called it the lean mass hyperresponder. And it's just sort of the whole concept is that some of the leaner, more muscular guys, when you switch to a ketogenic diet or a zero carb diet, the LDL particle size will increase. And so you will measure a higher LDL on your blood test, but that's simply because it's trafficking more lipids around the body. And, I go into the whole thing in my ebook, sort of to provide a better understanding of it. But I think we should be careful to state outright that, elevated LDL on its own is a risk factor for heart disease, because this is sort of extrapolated from a lot of correlational research on a Western diet in a normal population. And you can't necessarily say that this applies to a leaner, muscular guy training 5 to 6 days per week, losing a lot of weight, losing a lot of body weight, and all other health markers are basically perfect. So why should that one marker of LDL be an indicator of cardiovascular disease risk? And I think it's an interesting question that we don't really have a good answer for yet, but it begs the question that maybe we should, reevaluate some of the recommendations and at least on a general population level, obviously you shouldn't change all of those rules and indicators, but I think you should at least allow for some leeway when it comes to one of the more both extreme diet approaches and also extreme individual physical attributes.
Right. So just to give people an idea, what kind of macronutrient amounts are we talking about here? So when you're eating only meat, obviously probably your protein intake will be higher than what would be quote unquote needed for building muscle as per recommendations from most based on the scientific consensus these days, right?
Yeah. So a lot of people in the zero carb community tend to recommend that you should eat 1 gram of protein to 1 gram of fat, and because that's what they feel best on. I do think that seems to be more optimal for the general population on the zero carb diet that are not training and are not really, maybe they have some health issues, maybe they just want to lose some weight, whatever. I just don't feel very good if I eat a lot of fat, and especially not if I need to add fats to my food just to get the fat content up. So I did try that, but that sort of felt like the keto diet did, where you had to intentionally limit eating meat and, add butter or, fat sources to everything. That just didn't feel natural. So to me, I just eat fattier cuts of meat and some eggs, obviously. I did have some dairy after the 30-day period simply because, I can eat dairy. I feel fine on it. And my macros would usually range between 250 grams of protein and even up to 350 grams of protein on some days, just because I was really hungry on those days. Whereas my fat intake would range from probably 150 to 250. So on average, 50 to 60% protein, 40 to 50% fats in terms of calories. That would be, on average where I ended up. But like I said, I on some days I would track foods just to see where I was at. And so I because I kind of needed to readjust my food intake to get sufficient foods. But on most days I would just eat by instinct, by intuition. And to lean out, you can even eat leaner meats simply because that's almost as satiating as eating fattier cuts of meat. But I definitely feel best when I have like a moderate fat intake, but a high protein intake, and that's just what fits me and my personality and my needs. And I think most lifters would also thrive on having their protein intake higher in grams than their fat intake, but I think everyone should just experiment and see what they feel better on.
Yeah, I have to say I'm really very intrigued. I'm a little bit cautious before trying it out, just because my social life, which often involves food and even alcohol, is pretty active right now. But maybe as a New Year's challenge, it will be a cool thing for me to try out.
I can agree, and this is also one of the more common feedbacks I got from clients that, because people around me, like my family and friends, they're used to me doing weird shit, so they didn't really comment much of anything. And I found it easy to travel. My travel tip, I posted it on Instagram the other day. I just bring this tabletop grill that costs like $25, and I fry up steaks and ground meat in my hotel room. I think it's very simple and easy for traveling as well, and you can find meat anywhere in the world. Meat, fish, whatever. So that for me wasn't really an issue, but yeah, of course, when we went to visit like the grandparents of my wife, that was obviously an issue because they served cake and they served food that wasn't compliant with a zero carb diet. So I sometimes I would have some of that, and sometimes you just need to put it on your plate and eat some of it to avoid any attention or discussion. Around Christmas time, I know it can be difficult because people are used to, by tradition, to eating like certain cakes and certain treats for Christmas. So I obviously don't force people to follow it strictly during that time. But I think people should just generally feel what makes them feel the most healthy and give the best results, instead of eating what they crave because they have been programmed to, you're used to eating chocolate as a treat, so you will keep treating yourself with chocolate. But the funny thing about this diet is that all sorts of cravings just kind of disappear. I mean, I would stand in line to get coffee, and there would be rows and rows of cakes and bakery goods that I would usually find really, tasty and interesting. But on this diet, it was almost as if, I don't really want that. I don't really need that. I just feel good on what I'm eating now. So it's almost like to have sort of this wholesome, satiated, complete sort of fullness. And my guess is that it just sort of, since you avoid eating all types of sweets for 30 days, it sort of rebalances the brain chemistry. So you don't get all of these hits of dopamine and serotonin, even if you just look at sweet foods. And I would also find when I reintroduced carbs, for the blood test, which, by the way, tended to actually worsen a lot of my health markers. Even if my LDL dropped when I reintroduced carbs, a lot of my health markers and my CRP went to hell. But again, I digress. But I did notice when I reintroduced carbs that just one piece of chocolate would be almost too sweet. It was like this, wow, that's just too much. It would be overly sweet, whereas before I could easily eat like several pieces and it wouldn't faze me. So something is going on in the brain as well, some sort of rebalancing thing. And I think another client story I would like to mention, and she would be convinced that nothing I could do would wean her off the need for having sweets every weekend, and especially chocolate. And she also was like, in her own words, addicted to red wine. So she needed to drink at least one glass every evening, and it would end up being like one or even two bottles during the weekend. But after this 30-day phase, she didn't want red wine and she didn't want any sweets. Even when I told her, well, now it's okay for this weekend, since the 30 days are over, you can have a glass of wine if you want. You can have the sweets of your choice. Just sort of go easy on it. And she emailed me the Monday after and told me, you know what? When I was offered a glass of wine, when I had the opportunity to have the chocolate, I just didn't feel like it. I didn't want it. So I just find that really, really interesting. Of course, your mileage may vary, but I have seen these types of results in several clients now. So there's definitely something interesting going on there.
Yeah, that's a very underrated aspect of managing cravings and nutrition that a lot of people don't know until they experience it, is that your palate really do readjust. Like I remember at some point sweetening stuff to the point where Diet Coke didn't taste sweet to me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So at this point, I'm fully aware that I'm being abusive of your time. So just one last question before I actually ask you when people can find your work on this is that because I've seen you receiving a lot of attack on Facebook when you posted about this experiment, a lot of cynical comments and kind of talking to you in a condescending way. I think mainly because it kind of became a very politically correct or accepted thing to attack low carb type of protocols these days. And you are friends with a lot of big names in the industry. You know, you mentioned Menno, but you're also friends with Ellen Aragon, James Krieger, all these guys. I don't know. Have you talked to them about this experiment of yours? And what, if that you did, what was their general feedback and thinking of it?
Well, I think part of being in the fitness industry is that you have to dare to be polarizing sometimes, and so sometimes the part of being polarizing implies that you need to attack things that are sort of opposite to your own views. But in person, a lot of these guys, we are good friends, and we get along really well, and we don't start criticizing what they are posting or doing in their personal or even in their professional lives. We are more intrigued than curious. So it's kind of, it's kind of a shame to see that there are so many internet battles online where some of the followers even want their idols to pick battles with each other and call each other out. I would get some of my statuses. I would get people tagging Alan Aragon or Mike Israetel or whatever, depending on what I stated. But I think most of us are curious. I mean, we want to learn. We are still, at least in my case, I'm still humble. I mean, I have managed to preserve my humility. I realize there's so much more to learn, and I don't think I have the one and only answer to anything. And I'm still not being dogmatic about it. Like I said, I don't claim that this is the end-all, be-all diet that everyone should eat. I just post about my experiment. And so I've received nothing but positive feedback from my colleagues about this, that the usual response is, wow, that's interesting, And I think that speaks volumes about the quality of these guys, that they can be so accepting. I think the only thing they're not accepting of is people posting as experts or pretending to be experts and posting really stupid shit without any scientific foundation. I can totally resonate with that, but at least among us, I don't know, us respected evidence-based fitness industry people, we have so much mutual respect and admiration that we can actually discuss this without any bad or negative words being spoken.
That's great. So cool. I think we, despite all the technical difficulties we faced, we actually managed to go pretty deep, and we didn't cover everything, but we covered at least a good amount of ground. So thank you so much for doing this. And just finally, just tell people where they can find out more about this experiment of yours and all the resources that you've created on this for people to share out.
Well, you can go to my website, borgefagerli.com. It's the blog post about my zero carb experiment. And if you provide your name and email there, you can get a free PDF explaining how to do the 30-day experiment with just some basic guidelines. And if you want to dig deeper into it, you can get the Zero Carb ebook, and it's bundled with the MyoReps ebook and recipes and all that fun stuff. So, and I published it for only like a $10, and pay as much as you want, but at least $10 to cover the publishing cost. And I think most questions that people have will be answered in those ebooks. So if they really want some in-depth knowledge and background information, they should buy that. If they just want a simple, easy recipe, then just read my blog post and get the free PDF, and they should be good to go.
That sounds like an awesome deal for people. And I am very excited that you put all of this thing out. I had the chance of reading your ebook, and I finished it within one night, and it was a really fascinating read. So I really recommend people to go ahead and check it out. So Borge, thank you so much for doing this, and keep up the good work. So that was my interview with Borge Fagerli about his zero carb experiment. I think it can be a very interesting thing to try out, and I'm actually kind of contemplating to try it out myself. I think that trying this experiment can be very beneficial potentially from a gut health perspective. Now, if you have great digestion, you have no issues with all kinds of different foods, and you tolerate fibrous plant foods well, then it probably is not warranted from that perspective. But like I said during the call, for myself at this stage, for example, right now, I feel like my gut is just not very, for lack of a better term, robust. So I can just throw a whole bunch of random food types at it because it just gets pissed off. And this used not to be the case, but now it is. So maybe that could be a good indication for me to try it out. Another thing that it could be an interesting prospect for many people is how it could impact your palate, food cravings, and just overall relationship with food. I think there are a few interesting things that happen when you do something radical and you completely eliminate an entire class of foods from your diet or your life. Because for one, it dramatically reduces the amount of brain space and thinking time that you will dedicate to the whole act of eating. Because if breakfast, lunch, and dinner is all steak, then there's just not much thinking to do. And this can actually have great benefits in terms of productivity. I guess it's similar to when people do a 1 week fast or something. They often talk about how they got a ton of stuff done during that time simply because there was so much less time wasted. Then another thing, it will unquestionably reset your palate greatly. So I think from experience, anyone can tell you that you kind of get used to eating certain flavors of food and your standards get adjusted accordingly. So, as I said, in my hardcore dieting days, I used so much sweetener that even Diet Coke tasted bland at one point. And of course, it's no longer that way. I mean, that was pretty extreme. But it obviously works the other way around too. So if you go without these sweet, carby foods and even without sweetener, which is one recommendation that Borge makes in the book, you'll probably experience that once you reintroduce carbs, things like carrots, things like lower sugar fruits, which are normally not that sweet, will just taste unbelievably sweet and delicious. And then thirdly, I think it's at least very feasible that it can reset a lot of your brain circuits that contributed to a lot of your cravings if you had those. As in a sense, it's a behavioral detox where you eliminate all behaviors that surrounded up until now your tendency to maybe overeat certain foods or simply include foods on a regular basis into your diet that were not conducive to your goals or that contributed to your cravings. So it's kind of similar to the no-fap porn detox, which I talked about with Gary Wilson. I'm obviously not going to get into that here, but the point there is that guys who develop problems with porn use, they often have to withdraw from all kinds of sexual stimulation, not just quit porn, to kind of reset their brain circuits and to be interested in real partners once again. But anyway, if you're curious about that, check out my episode with Gary Wilson from yourbrainonporn.com. So anyway, that was kind of a weird note to finish on. But bottom line, I think there can be very interesting benefits to trying this out. I may give it a go myself in mid-January to February, once the holiday craze is over. The thing in my case, though, right now is that I do go out to eat and or drink with friends once or twice a week at least, usually. And having this kind of detox could be problematic. But, I mean, if I was to live my old ascetic fitness lifestyle, I probably would have given it a go already. But, I may create my own version for myself, like, all meat diet plus red wine or something. But anyway, I probably shouldn't say such things. I'm setting kind of a wrong example here. But anyway, if you're curious about more indications, contraindications, and specific recommendations regarding this diet, I highly recommend that you check out Borge's book. There will be a link in the description of this podcast, which may become an affiliate link. So if you do decide to order from that link, I highly appreciate it. And at any rate, thanks for hanging around. I wish you a holly jolly, super fun new year. Sorry, actually, I'll say it in Macedonian and Hungarian as well. So in Macedonian, it will be Srekna Nova Godina, and in Hungarian, it will be Boldog új évet. So anyway, see you all next time.